Hello YouTube. This is my first video about the paranormal aspects of the Russian space program. There'll be other videos in the future. This one has to deal with the psychological aspects of the space exploration. The very first incident that I want to describe to you had to do with the Salyut 7 space station, and it happened in 1984. Aboard the Soviet orbital station Salyut 7, as I said, and this incident, in view of the dominant ideology, was quite embarrassing to the Soviet regime and was hushed up for years. We still don't know all the details. I have one account. I understand there were others. I find this one to be more plausible. By the way, recently I told my audience about Igor Volk, who was a Soviet-era cosmonaut and a test pilot who passed away in January of 2017. He had one space flight in 1984, and it was intended to prepare him to fly the Soviet space shuttle Buran. That program was cancelled later. Volk, Janibekov, and Savitskaya, cosmonauts, launched on July 17, 1984 from the Soviet Baikonur Cosmodrome. And during the flight, Soyuz 7 mission to visit Salyut 7, Savitskaya became the first woman cosmonaut to go out on a spacewalk. Now, the crew at the manned space station at the time of the incident that I'll describe consisted of 6 cosmonauts: Leonid Kizim, Oleg Atkov, Vladimir Solovyov, Svetlana Savitskaya, Igor Volk, and Vladimir Janibekov. That incident began on the 155th day of the station's flight. The crew was busy with planned experiments, tests, and scientific observations. They were actually about to start medical experiments, and all of them were experienced and skilled cosmonauts. And then something that was totally out of their experience, knowledge, and understanding had taken place. Actually, in front of the Salyut 7 station, out of nowhere, suddenly appeared a large orange gas cloud, and its origin was unknown. The cosmonauts immediately informed the Soviet Space Mission Control Center, Центр управления полетом. While the astonished center analyzed the report, Salyut 7 had entered that strange cloud. Now, the crew had a brief impression that the orange cloud actually entered their station. They were all engulfed by the mysterious orange glow, blinded and out of contact with their comrades. However, their sight was restored quickly. Now, the cosmonauts, they went to the station's portholes, rushed to the station's portholes, I should say. What they saw left them speechless. There were seven gigantic shapes that could be identified inside the orange cloud. And the political ideals and the faith in the teachings of the Marxist-Leninist ideology were gone in a flash, because none of the cosmonauts doubted their eyes. None questioned that the shapes they had observed turned out to be 7 heavenly angels. This is how it was described. They, the angels, looked so much like humans, and yet they were quite different. Yet the so-called angels possessed huge wings and blinding halos. The main difference, however, lay in the angels' smiles. When they looked upon the Soviet crew, they actually smiled, and they had wonderful smiles, recalled the Soviet cosmonauts. Smiles of joy, of rapture. No human could smile like that. So the 10 minutes had gone by quickly, and as the clock ticked away the time, the angel disappeared along with their cloud. The crew of Salyut 7 felt like they experienced a devastating loss. But the Earth was demanding explanation. When the Mission Control Center received their report, it was immediately classified as top secret. A special team of doctors was formed to study the cosmonauts' well-being. So instead of carrying out further experiments in space, the crew was ordered to measure its own health, their own health, physical as well as mental. The tests indicated that the cosmonauts were well and of sound mind. The incident took place before the Gorbachev's perestroika period. So in order to make sure that there wasn't unnecessary noise, the Politburo made sure that the report remained secret. The crew of the Salyut 7 basically was warned to keep silent, because no angels could exist inside or outside of the Soviet Union. Igor Volk passed away, and we may never know what he actually knew. When I was reading his statements, I recall that he described conflicts among the cosmonauts, and he didn't get along with Savitskaya. But that's about it. Now I want to talk about Sergei Krzyzewski. And it's to the point, because Sergei Krzyzewski, a Ukrainian, is a former Soviet cosmonaut. Now he's a doctor of philosophy, professor of the Russian Academy of Public Administration, chief researcher at the Vavilov Institute of the History of Natural Science and Technology at the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he is the vice president of the Moscow Space Club. He also authored a number of scientific papers. From 1989 to 1998, he had trained as a test cosmonaut at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center of the Air Force, at the Ministry of Defense of the USSR and later Russia, where he prepared for a long-term space flight aboard the Soyuz TM and the orbital complex Mir. Sergei Krzyzewski had participated in research and development of aircraft, military rocket equipment, weapons, and space technology, as well as investigations into the issues of flight safety. Nowadays, Krzyzewski is also active in the so-called 2045 Initiative organization. It was founded by Russian entrepreneur Dmitry Itskov in 2011 with the participation of Russian specialists in the field of neural interfaces, robotics, artificial organs, and systems. It is a society where people are united by two ideas: extension of human life and human settlement in extraterrestrial space. The main science mega project of the 2045 initiative aims to create technologies enabling the transfer of individuals' personality to a more advanced non-biological carrier and extending life, including to the point of immortality. A large-scale transformation of humanity comparable to some of the major spiritual and scientific technical revolutions in history will require a new strategy. That's what they believe. The members of 2045 also believe this to be necessary to overcome existing crises, which threaten our planetary habitat and the continued existence of humanity as a species. What they're looking for is possible alternatives to the existence of man after Earth ends its own existence. What is of main interest to us in this video is the fact that Krzyzewski has analyzed an information about the altered state of consciousness of cosmonaut in flight around the Earth orbit and proposed a number of hypotheses about the nature of this phenomenon. Sergei Krzyzewski shared his information with the Russian newspaper Trud in 1999 and later presented his views at the International Scientific Research Institute of Cosmic Anthropoecology. He heard about the space glitches from one well-known colleague who spent 6 months aboard the orbital station Mir and wanted to warn Krzyzewski, who at the time had been training for a space flight, of possible dangers. The man told him not to be amazed should Krzyzewski experience or see something incredible in space that will actually look quite realistic. The cosmonaut referred to daydreams that visited many of the Soviet and later Russian cosmonauts. So, to preclude disqualification from the space flights, the cosmonauts were not eager to discuss their daydreams. They talk about the dreams, sharing experiences, and sometimes they warned greenhorns, so to say, to be quiet. So, what happened to the cosmonauts during their dream state? A human being was subjected to one or more transformations, unexpectedly turning into a supernatural animal, actually feeling himself or herself in the animal's skin. Such reincarnations could last for various periods of time. For example, a cosmonaut feeling his enormous claws, scales, and membranes between fingers would roam on an unknown planet and communicate with its other inhabitants. Later, he or she would become some other being. For instance, he would change into the body of a being or entity from another era or from another galaxy, would immediately learn the new language, traits, and customs. Such completely unknown world he or she perceives as something quite realistic. No known space science technology is able so quickly and easily transform a human being through space and time. At the same time, as Sergei Krzyzewski determined, all of the cosmonauts who had been in such state had discerned some powerful external flow of information. Some of the cosmonauts Krzyzewski described this with, they had actually written diaries of their fantastic adventures, but they categorically refused to show such writings to scientists or to publish them. Well, you can understand why. Because the phenomenon is shrouded in secrecy, even Krzyzewski, a scientist and member of the Tsiolkovsky Academy of Cosmonautics, does not find it easy to recognize its true nature. He believes that the phenomenon of such fantastic states of consciousness is of great experience to scientists. Our psyche is still not sufficiently explored, and moreover, it is almost unknown what happens to it outside of the bounds of Earth in the state of weightlessness. During the glitches, the cosmonaut would always remain inside his own body and would not exhibit any strange behavior. This was confirmed by the cosmonaut colleagues and video cameras aboard space flights. Another detail uncovered by Krzyzewski, but concealed by those who had experienced it, is that many cosmonauts who had been in such state, they actually started to crave this state. In other words, they became similar to drug addicts. In time, they somehow tune into this rush and are able to artificially induce the daydreams. But cosmonauts cannot do it on Earth. There, on our planet, the cosmonaut goes into a withdrawal. So what is the nature of this phenomenon? Probably it can be explained by the direction of cosmic streams. That's what Krzyzewski believes. And the length of time a human being spends there. Krzyzewski added that perhaps the space environment is toxic and contains some unknown hallucinogenic. Now I want to talk about the cosmic whisper. I described it before and I want to go into more details. I believe we're dealing with the same phenomena here. There are still episodes of the Soviet space exploration that are not widely discussed even in modern Russia. Such is the accounts of the so-called space whisper. One former Soviet cosmonaut, let's call him Cosmonaut X, revealed some information but demanded that his name remain anonymous. And he revealed it to Russian media, of course. This cosmonaut recalled that Soviet cosmonauts heard hushed-up rumors about the so-called whisper, but did not share definite information among themselves. nor did they report it to the doctors. They were afraid that the doctors would remove them from the space program, understandably. Cosmonaut X and his colleague believed that the rumors are a legend that was created by the actual first team of Soviet cosmonauts to scare the greenhorns. But he was wrong. And here is his story. He and other cosmonauts were aboard a Soviet spacecraft, flying over the southern hemisphere, when the whisper came to them. The narrator said that he suddenly felt as if someone else was right next to him. He felt that some invisible being stared into his back, and it was a hard gaze that he felt. The cosmonaut had no doubt that he was being observed. A second later, his comrade, the flight engineer, who was looking into the porthole, sharply turned around and looked about him. Both cosmonauts were quite ordinary people in that, they were removed from any mystical beliefs. They didn't go into metaphysical stuff. They were Soviet citizens. But they were also good friends, and they knew each other long before the Star City training. That is why they were not afraid to compare their impressions about after the episode came to the conclusion. They received different so-called texts from that whisper, but their initial reaction to the whisper was identical. Both cosmonauts became mute and dumbfounded. The whisper came from the depths of the cosmonaut X consciousness. And here's what it sounded like. You arrived here too early, and you did it in a wrong fashion. Trust me, because I'm your ancestor on the maternal side. Do you remember she told you, back when you were a child, about your great-grandfather who had founded such and such factory in the Urals? Sonny, you should not be here. Go back to Earth. Do not violate the laws of the Creator. Sonny, you must return. The whisper also told the cosmonaut a very private story, as if to prove his knowledge that had existed only inside the family of that cosmonaut. It concerned the cosmonaut's great-grandfather. Now, both cosmonauts were back on Earth 2 days later. But the whisper came to them one more time before, and the texts of what it said were the same as the very first time, and both felt alien presence through their time in the orbit. The cosmonauts faced a dilemma. Do they report the incident or not? If they did report it, their careers would end immediately. They would be considered impressionable people, their psyche too unstable for further flights into space. Other cosmonauts kept somewhat silent about the whisper. At least nothing was reported to their superiors, as far as we know. Cosmonaut X and his colleagues spent endless hours trying to determine what it was that they had experienced. They were atheists and both liked science fiction. So this led them to a conclusion that alien intelligence, using some kind of hypnosis, is determined to prevent the mankind from exploring the outer space, to convince the mankind that its sons and daughters in the outer space are not experiencing hallucinations. Hard facts are presented, facts that are picked up after probing human brains, memories, and subconscious. How long have they, whoever they are, researched our civilization? Could be thousands of years. But are the aliens, or whoever they are, so naive as not to understand that we would see their ploy? Then if it was not an alien whisper, then whose whisper was it? Did the departed relatives really visit Soviet cosmonaut crews in space? This conclusion shattered the cosmonauts' convictions, their atheism, their view of the world. Does it mean that there is life after death, and that the consciousness, not the physical body, continues to exist on some other stages of existence? There must be a hierarchy to such stages, and on the top of the hierarchy would be the creator, as the great-grandfather had informed Cosmonaut X. Well, their sense of duty told both cosmonauts that a report has to be made. They did not listen to that sense, but some other cosmonauts who had heard the whisper actually did make the reports, according to X. As a result, special medical teams were introduced into the training program. Top-rated medical hypnotists became to explore cosmonauts' psyches, and the whole flight training program had to undergo changes. Cosmonaut X, who had since retired, doesn't know how the whisper is treated nowadays and what conclusions Russian scientists have come to. His report was published in 1997. He did say that his whole outlook on life has changed. The outer space is full of intelligence, is much more complicated than we imagine it to be. Our present knowledge does not allow us to understand the essence of most processes taking place in the universe. Our abilities are still quite limited. But those who had heard that whisper, to them one thing is clear. The future exists, and it is endless, just as time and space are endless. So this was the account of Cosmonaut X. Not long ago, I read reports about Yuri Gagarin, doing some research that I needed for my future books. Yuri Gagarin was the first Soviet cosmonaut officially, and he also, in one of the reports, claimed that he heard whispers while in orbit. There is not enough information yet to confirm it, but he also mentioned about a presence that he felt while in space. He also reported more than once about the noises that he heard in space, including babies crying, dogs barking, and of course he wasn't the only Soviet cosmonaut to do so. Who knows what awaits the humans in our exploration of the outer space. We didn't go that far from the embrace of our planet, but we already have encountered phenomena that we're not able as yet to explain. And I'm sure as humans venture more into space, we'll encounter more of the phenomena that can be described now as paranormal. But in the future videos, I'll describe Soviet and Russian cosmonauts' observations of UFOs and other unusual objects.